L'kutei Sichos Chelek Chaf Aleph Boy Beis Lila Nishmas Rabbi Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. We are also learning l'schus our dear friend Yosef Shleima Ben Risha for a refuah shleima ukreva. This is actually the last sicha in this, or the second to last sicha in this cycle of year 5 of Project L'kutei Sichos, and it is a great simcha that next week we are beginning a brand new Chelek Chavav, and a brand new year. And it's a wonderful opportunity to get back onto the bandwagon or to join the bandwagon and to spend your weeks learning L'kutei Sichos. Okay, so sometimes you learn a sicha where the Rebbe takes a mitzvah that you might have thought that it was just a regular mitzvah, and the Rebbe teaches us how this mitzvah is the entire Torah. It's the most important mitzvah. And we're going to have this experience today with the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, of sanctifying the new moon, where we're going to learn how fundamental this mitzvah is to the entire Torah. The Sikha is going to begin with a discussion in Nigla, and then is going to continue with a discussion according to Pnimi Yisrael Yanim, an absolutely fascinating Sikha. Let us begin. With regards to the witnesses that come to testify that they have seen the new moon, and with that Bezdin would sanctify the moon, meaning to say they would proclaim that a new month can begin. So it had to be done through 2 witnesses who would see the new moon. So there is a machlokes, a disagreement, a dispute in the Gemara. Reb Shimon halt as av u'bnoi v'chol ha'krevim. Shimon holds that a father and a son, or for that matter, any relatives, despite the fact that, generally speaking, when it comes to witnesses in halacha, they are not allowed to be relatives, not to the person, to the subject, nor to each other. Nevertheless, Shimon holds that by Kiddush HaChodesh, the witnesses that come to testify about the new moon, they are allowed to be relatives, father, son, or other types of relatives. The pasuk says Hashem spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, the new month will be for you, or to you. So Reb Shimon learns that this means that this testimony is kosher, is acceptable with you. Moshe and Aaron, coming from Moshe and Aaron, Brider. Moshe and Aaron were brothers, and yet the Torah says that they could serve as witnesses that they saw the new moon, and therefore Reb Shimon learns that any relatives can be used as edim, as witnesses, when it comes to Kiddush HaChodesh, to sanctifying the new month. The Rabbanan halten as krevim seinen Posel Leilas HaChodesh. The Rabbanan argue, they disagree with Reb Shimon, and they hold that just like in all matters of testimony, you cannot use relatives, so too by Kiddush HaChodesh or Eidus HaChodesh, you cannot have relatives. Under pasuk meint, Reb Shimon had Raya HaChodesh is Elochem. It doesn't mean, say the Rabbanon, that you could be the witnesses. That this testimony can be delivered to you. As a Bezdin is Mekabel the Eidus Mekadosh Chodesh. That Moshe and Aaron could be part of the Bezdin that would receive the testimony and sanctify and proclaim a new month. So they say not Ksheira Bachem, but Mesura Lachem. And therefore they say you cannot use Krevim. Why would Reb Shimon hold that this is different than any other form of edus, where usually they cannot be relatives, and here Reb Shimon holds you could have relatives? Is mevar the Rebbe Marash, the tam from Reb Shimon, at edus achedus is anders from kol edus. The Rebbe Marash in a Maimer explains the opinion of Reb Shimon why this would be different than all other forms of testimony. Vibald as a filua on the edus. Since in this case, Bezdin has the information without the edim, without the witnesses. Bezdin would have to study the astronomical calculations, and they would figure out when is the new month begins, and they had this information even without the witnesses. As we do nowadays, that we don't have testimonies, that we don't have a bezdin that could proclaim a new month, and instead we rely on the mathematical calculations. So too then, the information Bezdin had without the witnesses. Kumtois, as the edus is nita zach was beladem lo yoydim klal, which means that this testimony that the witnesses are bringing is not something that the Bezdin did not know without them. And therefore, even witnesses are eligible for this testimony, implying almost that we don't even need the testimony, and therefore we could rely on subpar witnesses. It's not exactly what he says, but this is sort of the implication, that we don't need the best edus because we have the information already. Davon verstehen, but immediately the Rebbe asks on this, the fact that we don't allow witnesses to testify is not because we think they're going to cover for each other and they're not going to give true testimony. The Gemara says that it was a decree of the Eibishter. The Eibishter decreed, so to speak, which means to say that even if it's not necessarily always understood according to logic, this is what the Torah says, that Krevim, that relatives, should not be witnesses. So why would it matter if Bezdin knows the information before the edus come or not? If the Eibishter paskind, if the Eibishter ruled, if Torah rules, that means that witnesses, that relatives can't be witnesses, then why would it matter what they're testifying about? So the Rebbe explains what is the meaning of what the Rebbe Marash is trying to say. And it says like this: Edus is nit nur a biur al pi seichel. When witnesses come to give edus, it's not just that they're verifying the facts, that logically we should know what happened. Nor says adin va'asiyas gmar davar ugzeiras akasov. It is establishing a law. It is completing something. And this is what the Eibishter, this is a gzeira, this is a decree of the Torah. Al pishnei edim yakum davar, that this thing becomes established once you have two witnesses. So it's not just about the information. Sometimes, without the witnesses, I don't know what happened. The witnesses tell me what happened. Reuven borrowed from Shimon, or whatever it might be. Says the Rebbe that edus is not just about birur. Edus is there's another element to it. There is the fact that Torah wants that in order for this to be considered an event that actually occurred, in order to establish the occurrence of this event, there needs to be two people that saw it and testify about it. As the Rambam says, we were commanded to render a din, to render a ruling on the alpi according to the testimony of two kosher witnesses. Even if it's possible that they lied, not always do you know for sure that they're telling the truth. Obviously, Bezdin would investigate and interrogate, but at a certain point, Torah says that once you have two witnesses that are testifying, that establishes that this event has occurred. But the same thing could be used in the other direction. Das was Krevim sein in Posteledis is genau afilu wenn nit talking chashas evel meshaker sein. Just like Torah says that you need two edim to establish that something happened, so too you can't use Krevim. You can't use relatives, even if we don't suspect them that they're going to lie. Well, they're taken from edus is nit nur mitzad dem birur sichli, was man hat say. If it was just about making sure that they're telling the truth, to know what actually happened, then we have to make sure they're telling the truth. And if let's say they're relatives, but we know they're telling the truth, then what will be the problem? But once we're establishing that there's an aspect of din here, the din says that you need two edim, and they can't be relatives, even if there's no suspicion whatsoever that they're going to lie. Once Torah paskined that you need to have two witnesses and they can't be relatives, they can't be relatives. Well, they're taking from edus nicht nur mit nitzadem birur sichli was man hat durchgesehen. Nur das taking from din Torah, welche Torah hat nicht gegeben zu Krevim. What the edim are doing is they're giving the event the veracity of Torah. The Torah verifies, the Torah establishes that this event happened. Torah did not give the power to relatives to verify or to establish rather that this event happened. So that's generally speaking. Generally, why don't we use Krevim? even if they might be telling the truth, because the whole idea of edus is to be I don't want to use the word kiyum because the Rebbe doesn't use the word kiyum, but let's just use the word din Torah or the toikif of din Torah. The edim give the event the toikif of a din of Torah, and that toikif was not given, that strength, that power was not given to Kroivim, to relatives. So the Rebbe Marash is saying that when it comes to establishing the new month, is that mukhrach the toikif on edus. We don't need that strength of the edus. Since genug der birda shepayach has been, the mathematical calculations are sufficient. Which is why in today's day and age we rely on the calculations and not on the edim. In other words, the din of the new month is established even without edim. The riber is eich by edus achedus fadert sich ladas Reb Shimon blaze the birush al de edus. So therefore, according to Reb Shimon, what's happening when the edim do come in the time when the Beis Hamikdash was standing, in the time when there was a bezdin, what the edim are doing is they're doing just the birur. They're just confirming that the events happened. Ubemeli is nafal ben talking chashash v'shema yeshakir. So if you only are doing birur, then all you need to know is that they're telling the truth. You don't need them to have the toikif of Torah. So if they're relative, if it's a regular edus, as relatives, they don't have a toikif of the din of Torah, so they can't testify. But if it's just birur, if it's just to confirm what we already know, but to confirm that it actually happened, so then as long as we know that they're not lying, for example, in this case, that the relatives have no personal bias, so therefore even relatives can be kosher leidus. That's how the Rebbe explains the opinion of the Rebbe Marash. That generally speaking, edim are not just bir but also din, and kroivim don't have the power of the power of din to be able to say edus. But if edus achedus is an exception, not if, it is an exception because it's only about birur, and if it's only about birur, all you know is they're telling the truth. So even if they're relatives, as long as we know that they're not, as long as there's no suspicion that they're lying, we could trust them. That's the Shimon's opinion. That the ksherim, that relatives are kosher leidus achedish, because leidus achedish is only a matter of birur, and all you need to know is that they're telling the truth. They don't need the toikif that Torah gives witnesses, because that we already have just from the calculations that Bezdin can make. Okay. In Sif Beis, the Rebbe is going to say that once we understand that this approach, that Eidus HaChedesh is unique from all other Eiduyos, from all other forms of testimony in Torah, and because of that, and the reason for that is because it's a birur and not a din, according to that, it's going to answer a separate question, a new question. This will answer this another question. The din is that the din is that relatives are not that converts are not considered to be related. Meaning even two brothers that were born from the same parents and then they both converted to Yiddishkeit, they can say testimony one for another. The gershon is garik a because a ger that converts is like a newborn child, and he's not considered halachically related to his biological relatives that were born before his gerus. Now here's the question that we're going to ask on Reb Shimon. According to the opinion in the Gemara, that Yidden at Matan Torah, at Bayitzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah, had the halachic classification of Gedim of converts. How could you learn from Moshe ve'Aaron that Eidus is Ksheda, that Eidus could be given by relatives? From Gedim, since they were Gedim, maybe that's why they can give testimony, because they were Gedim, they weren't considered halachically related. So how could you learn from that to real actual relatives after Matan Torah? That's the question that someone could have. How can you learn from Moshe and Aaron, who were Gedim and therefore halachically not considered related, to regular relatives after Matan Torah, and say that a father and a son or two brothers can give edus about the new month? But based on what we said previously, we can say like this. The fact that we say, generally speaking, that converts are not considered related and therefore they are allowed to testify together is mitzadem vas psul kurva is adin ugzeides hakosov. It's part of the din. Just like the din is that you have to have two witnesses, and that the two witnesses can't be the two witnesses. Just like the din is that you can't have two witnesses, that you need to have two witnesses, the din is that relatives are not considered witnesses. And but if you're going in this category that you're talking about din, the din is that there has to be two witnesses, and the din is that relatives don't count. Then the same din says that in the realm of din, the gedim halachically are not considered related to each other, and therefore they don't have the disqualification of being related. But in this exception of Eidos HaChedesh, which, as we explained so beautifully in the previous Seif, is only a birur shal pi seichel, it's only verifying or confirming the facts that we should know that they actually happened, is there chisaron from krevim in dem sug eidos. Then the problem, the reason why we wouldn't use krevim, why we wouldn't use relatives, is not because of the din, because this isn't about din. The only problem would be mitzadem kiruv adas as dabakrevim. You would think that because these two people are closely related, they'll cover for each other, and therefore we can't trust them. If it's just birur, then it's not about din. It's not because the din disqualified them. The reason they're being disqualified is because we don't trust them. And since the closeness that we find by brothers would apply also to two brothers that both went through a conversion, even though halachically they're not related, they're still going to have a relationship with each other. So therefore, technically, they should have been pasul. Because once we're saying that it's about birur, not about din, then it's not just about what the halacha says. It's about, can we trust them? And since technically we shouldn't be able to trust brothers, even though they're gedim, then they should have been pasul edus. Meaning to say that when it comes to a case of birur, the brothers that are converted are the same close and the same way problematic as brothers that were born Jewish. They both have a kiruv adas, and therefore Kemen uplernen von dem was Moshe Aaron an Kshedim leide zu auf die Lachem an Torah krevim. So from the fact that the Torah anyway allowed Moshe and Aaron to say testimony, even though there's a kiruv hadas, there's a closeness between them, and we would have thought maybe not to trust them. And from Dezek, and the Torah says that you could use them as edus, then you could learn from that to regular relatives. That the same thing. That when it comes to Eidos HaChedesh, we can trust the relatives. We can trust relatives to give edus. It's only about birur, and therefore they don't need the din of edim. And the fact that Moshe and Aaron were gedim doesn't change the fact, because logically brothers that are gedim are the same thing as brothers that are not gedim. And from the fact that Moshe and Aaron were kosher leedus zu according to the Shimon, krevim after Matan Torah are also kosher because they go into the same category. So once we see that Eidos HaChedesh is an exception to all other eduyos, to all other forms of testimony, and the reason is because it's birur, not din, we can now understand the comparison between Moshe and Aaron, despite the fact that they were gedim, to regular krevim. That in a case where it's just birur, then the brothers that are nisgayer and regular brothers are in the same category, and you can learn one from the other. So Atkan is the focus on Reb Shimon. We now understand Shittas Reb Shimon the way that Rebbe Marash explained it in the Maimer, and we also understand how Reb Shimon is able to learn this din from Moshe and Aaron. Siv Gimel, we're going to talk about the Das Rabbanon. The halacha aber bleibt Das Rabbanon, as krevim an apostle Eidos HaChedesh. The halacha remains not like Reb Shimon, but like the Rabbanon, that krevim, the relatives, are pasul, are not allowed to testify for the testimony of the new month. Und der Fund ist verstandig, als euch bei Kiddush HaChedesh darf man haben dem Din Edus. And from this we understand that the Rabbanon hold that you can't say that Kiddush HaChedesh is only birur. You have to say that it's birur and din. And therefore, mitzad the fact that it's also din, therefore you can't use krevim, you can't use relatives. And to explain where they're coming from, until now we had a very logical approach. Bestin already knows the information. The Rosh Chodesh could become Rosh Chodesh al pi din even without edus. So why do we need a din? The din we have, all we need is birur. But the Rabbi is going to explain as follows. Jetzt war es für us. Von dem Gufe, was Torah hat dann gesagt, dass es muss ein Eide de ihr. For the fact that Torah necessitates witnesses here, that they should see the moon as Moshe and Aaron saw it at that moment, and with that they should be able to sanctify the new month. The fact that Torah says you need Edom, since anyway a Bezdin has to go through all the calculating to figure out the exact moment of the birth of the new month. Even at the time when they were sanctifying the new month based on the testimony, they were still also relying on Bezdin's calculations. For example, in a case where the Bezdin knew for certain that it's impossible that the moon appeared, and Edom witnesses came and said they saw the moon, they don't trust the witnesses because Bezdin knows it's impossible, which means that the Bezdin is really relying mostly on their own calculations. Why did Hashem say that you need to have witnesses? Is there gedrungen? But from the fact that the Torah says that you do need witnesses, as Torah will moisiv sein auf inyan hacheshbon, the Torah wants it to be more than just a calculation. Und der Fahr lernen Rabbanon, and therefore Rabbanon learn, as Torah will zugeben, as the Kvius und es Chedes soll sein, nicht nur auf Cheshbon, was ist Birur, nur soll haben dem Teke von Din Edus, was auf Shnei Edom Yakum Dover. From this we see that the Eibishter wanted, the Torah wants, that even though we already have the Cheshbon, Torah wants more than that. Torah wants more than just the Cheshbon, which is Birur. Torah wants that there should be also an addition of din. In other words, we shouldn't just base the din on the Cheshbon, but we should have the edim that will intensify the strength of this, intensify the din with their edus. In other words, according to Reb Shimon, the edus is only birur, and therefore he holds karev markasha leedus. Rabbanan say, if edus is only birur, who needs the edus? Muzmedach zagin that the edus is not only birur, the edus is birur and din. And if the edus is din, then you have to follow the din of edus in all other cases, and therefore karevim are pasul leedus. Says the Rebbe in Sivdala, this raises a question in the other direction. Since we are using these two witnesses, that their testimony is what we use in order to sanctify the new month, and the Torah says that according to two witnesses, Yakum Davar, this is what establishes the thing. So really, we don't need anything else. So in that case, why is this any different than all the other forms of testimony that we're not relying solely on the witnesses and on the interrogation or the investigation by the Bezdin of the witnesses? But we require the Bezdin to make the calculations. And if the calculations doesn't fit, doesn't go together with the if the edus and the cheshbon don't match, then we don't rely on Edom. So the once you tell me that the Eibishter wanted the Edom should have a takif of din, so once the Edom come and say and give their testimony, so you have here the establishment of a new month. Why do you need Bezdin to do the calculations? According to Reb Shimon, the calculations is the main thing. The Bezdin, the Edom is only for birur. Fine, but according to the Rabbanan, that they're saying that the Edom is not just for birur, but it's also for din. So you have the whole din from the Edus. Who needs the calculations? Why does the Torah say that in the case of Kiddush HaChedesh, you have to have calculations as well? And this the Rebbe is going to answer Reb So in Yonim, the Rebbe doesn't answer it according to Nigla. The Rebbe is going to take us on a bit of a journey here to understand the idea of Kiddush HaChedesh, its significance according to Chassidus, according to Pnimi So in Yonim, and based on that, it will understand why you need both Cheshbon and Din. Both Edus and Cheshbon. In jedem von die zwei Inyanim Eideiyo and Chesben is da amayla shein ba'asheni. Each of these two things, the witnesses and the calculations, have an advantage that the other one doesn't have. In other words, each one is contributing something that the other one doesn't contribute. And because the establishment of Rosh Chodesh is so fundamental to Torah and mitzvahs, we'll explain soon why it's so fundamental. But because it's so fundamental, it needs to have both advantages. And therefore, in order to establish this Chodesh, we have to have, when we can, we have to have both the citing by the witnesses as well as the calculations by Bezdin. So now we have to explain, what does this mean? What is Pshat that Kviyas Rosh Chodesh is fundamental to Torah and mitzvahs? And what does it mean that we need to have both the witnesses and the calculations? So let's take one step at a time. First, we're going to establish what does it mean that Rosh Chodesh, the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, is fundamental to Torah and mitzvahs. So first we have to introduce the Maimer that on the pasuk Achedes Zalachem. And the Medrash says, brought in Rashi, when it comes to Chumash Bereshis, which is all about the creation of the world and the stories, so to speak, of the Avos leading up to the time of Mitzrayim, the Rashi brings from the Medrash, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, it's not necessary. Torah should have started from Achedes Zalachem. Rashi is masbir. The mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh is the very first mitzvah that the Yidden were commanded. So the question that is being asked over there in the Medrash is, why does the Torah not start from the first mitzvah? The Torah really, seemingly, is all about the mitzvahs. So it should have started from the first mitzvah. Is the Chayre nit move on? So once we receive from this that Kiddush HaChedesh is the first mitzvah, this raises our own question. In other words, that question, we're not going to go into that. That is a Rashi that says that Keach Ma'asav Yigid the Eibishter wanted to establish that the world is his, and that Eretz Yisrael was given to the Yidden, a different discussion. But from the fact that the Chodesh HaZelachem is established as the first mitzvah, this raises a separate question. Why is that the first mitzvah? Why did the Eibishter choose this mitzvah as the first mitzvah to be commanded to the Jewish people? The first mitzvah should have been the first dibra, the first mitzvah of the Aseret HaDibros, which is Kabbalas El Malchus Shmaim, to accept upon oneself the yoke of heaven, versus the Aschala v'Yoseit Kiyum Kol Mitzvahs, which is the foundation and the beginning of every mitzvah. Before a person does a mitzvah, they have to have Kabbalas El, they have to accept the yoke of heaven. It's necessary to do a mitzvah properly to have Kabbalas El. So that seemingly is the in Lashon Chassidus is Da Tara La'ala, that Kabbalas El is the gateway to ascend. That is seemingly the most fundamental mitzvah. So why would we start with Achedes Zalachem and not with Kabbalah Zel, with Anechi Hashem Lekecha? Is the Bir Bazeh? So the Rebbe explains. Anechi Hashem Lekecha is the Aschala v'Yiseit Nala mitzvahs benegetim Kiyum mitzvahs apoyel. Anechi Hashem Lekecha is the very first mitzvah, the foundational mitzvah, when it comes to the actual fulfillment of the mitzvah. In order for a person to fulfill the mitzvah properly, Muz Ba'im Frier Zayin, the Kabbalah Zel Chashmaim, he has to first have the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. Achedes Zalachem is the matara v'tachlis from Torah mitzvahs. Achedes Zalachem is not so fundamental to each individual mitzvah that you can't do it without that mitzvah, like we say by Kabbalah's oil. But Achedes Zalachem is the mission statement, is the purpose of the whole Torah mitzvahs. When they're farid das nisboring gedagevan ba'akdamat ala mitzvahs alt mitzvah rishena, and therefore it's said first as the first mitzvah, because once we learn Achedes Zalachem, we understand what is the purpose and the reason why the Eibishter gave us Torah mitzvahs. Each individual mitzvah taka needs Kabbalah El first. But in order for us to approach Torah mitzvahs in general, say, why did the Eibishter create the Torah mitzvahs? Why did he give it to us? We'll learn it from the mitzvah of Achedes Zalachem. So Achedes Zalachem is the mission statement of the Torah, and that's why it comes first. What is the mission? What are we seeing in Achedes Zalachem? So the Rebbe says weiter. The kavanah von Torah mitzvahs is as Eden soll uftan achidish in der Bria. Let's take the word HaChodesh, and let's learn the word HaChodesh. HaChodesh, why is it called HaChodesh? Because the moon becomes new. The word Chodesh is from the word Chidush, newness, something new, something novel. So the purpose, the mission statement of Torah mitzvahs is that Yidden should bring something new into creation. And the Rebbe is going to say soon the idea of Dira B'Tachtonim. Now, the Eibishter created the world. The Eibishter created the world with some godliness, but not Dira le'izbarach b'tachtenim. And the purpose of Torah mitzvahs is that a Yid should create a Dira le'izbarach b'tachtenim, and that is a major chiddush, as we'll see later in the Sikha. So therefore, hachodesh hazel lachem, hachodesh, the mission statement of Torah mitzvahs is that the Yidden should make a chiddush, something new in creation. As we find the deeper explanation on the saying of Chazal, that the deeds of tzaddikim are greater than the creation of heaven and earth. And you're going to say, well, you're going to wonder, what does that mean? Creating heaven and earth, if not for that, you wouldn't have tzaddikim. They wouldn't be able to do anything. What's shot that what they do is greater? So this explains, creating the world was creating something from nothing. Aber meiste tzaddikim is vazei tu enuf dem bittul hayesh alayin. Then come the tzaddikim, and they take this something that was created, and they infuse it with a bittul to the ayin, to the nothingness from which it came, which is a much greater accomplishment. To create something out of nothing is one level. To create nothing out of something, or it's not literally like that, but to create a surrender of the something to the nothing, that's a much greater deal. Und der Fahr is gedolim in Meister Shemaim V'aretz. That's why the word is gedolim, the greater. Al derech ma'amer Chazal, similar to what Chazal say, as Gadol ha'ya neis acher yisem en arishon. This is a reference to a story in the Gemara in Tainis, where Reb Chanina ben Teisa and his wife were struggling with poverty, and they davened to Hashem, and a hand came down from heaven and dropped down a golden table leg. And with that, they would be able to support themselves. But then, Reb Chanina ben Teisa's wife had a dream in which she saw that all of their colleagues were in Gan Eden with, and their table, each one had 3 legs, and the table of Rabbi Chanina ben Teisa and his wife had 2 legs. And she said, I want to come to Gan Eden with a table that's missing a leg. So he said, daven. So they davened, and a hand came down from Shamayim, from heaven, and took the table leg back. So the Gemara says over there, the second miracle, that of taking the leg back, was a greater miracle. Because to give from heaven is given. Heaven gives. Mishkal leishakli, but heaven doesn't take back. Der Nes von Umkehren azach zu ayin, Mishkal, the miracle of transforming something that's already a something into a nothing, is gresser wie der Nes von Mea v'yavi, as is over azach ma'ayin liyesh, is much greater than the miracle of turning nothing into something. For that golden table leg to come into this world, it had to be in Gan Eden. It was an ayin. In order for it to come into this world, it becomes a yesh. So that's one level. But to take it back, it means to turn the ayin, to turn the yesh back into an ayin. That's a much greater deal. And that's the remez in Achedes Zalachem, and that's the message in Achedes Zalachem. Chedesh is milashon chidush. Chedesh comes from the expression, from the source, from the root word of chidush, of newness. Und der Keach von chidush is übergegeben geworden zu Eden. Lachem. And Yidden were given this power of creating something new. Was durch Torah und Mitzvahs machen sie die Welt adira leizbarach, in order to that through Torah mitzvahs they are able to transform this world into a dwelling place for Hashem. We will soon see what that means and why that's why that's such a big chiddush. But let's first understand. Let's first digest what we have so far, and that is that the mitzvah of Achedes Zalachem is the mission statement of Torah mitzvahs. The mission is Dira b'tachtenim, and it's alluded to in the words Achedes Zalachem that you have the obligation, you have this mission, Achedes, to create a chiddush, that even though there's creation, but which is yes me'ayin, but you're going to make a chiddush in it. You're going to do something new to it. You're going to bring a bittul in this world ad kedei kach that there's going to be a dirib leizbarach b'tachtonim. Before we understand the chiddush shebedavar, which the Rebbe is going to explain in Siv Zayin, the Rebbe first in Siv Vav explains Moshe and Aaron's part in this chiddush, or introduces Moshe and Aaron's part in this chiddush. It sounds like we're introducing a whole new medrash here, so it's not meant to throw you off. The points that we have until here is as follows. Number 1, that we need, number one, we're explaining why both Eidim and Cheshbon are necessary for this mitzvah, because this mitzvah is so fundamental a mitzvah. Why is this mitzvah so fundamental? Because it's the mission statement of Torah mitzvahs. What is the mission statement? That we should make a chiddush in creation, which the chiddush is to take something that's yesh me'ayin and turn it from ayin, something that was created me'ayin liyesh, and to take the yesh and turn it into an ayin, which means to make a dira leizbarach b'tachtainim, which is the purpose of the whole Torah mitzvahs, and this is alluded to in Achidus Zalachem. Now, because Achidus Zalachem is the basis of this conversation, therefore we're going to introduce one more medrash on Achidus Zalachem that actually draws Moshe and Aaron into the picture. So the medrash says, the pasuk is Teiv Mashtayim and Echad. 2 is always better than 1. That's a pasuk. So the medrash says, Teiva parsha shenemra al pishnayim, parsha shenemra al biyachid. There is a preference to a parsha that was said by Hashem to 2 people than if it was said to 1 person. Bishnayim, and as an example of a parsha that was said by 2 people, said two people. So is nitglat. So we have to understand this medrash. As an Efaran kama v'kama parashas and Torah bavel chamidas HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given El Moshe v'Aaron. There are numerous parashas. In the order of 41, he says there's 13 dibros, 13 sayings that were said to Moshe and Aaron together. He said, "Was bringt the medrash dafka di parsha von Achidus?" Why does the medrash, out of all 13, why does the medrash use this specific example, this specific parsha, as the example where you see toiv mashnayim in ha'achad, the fact that it was said to 2 is a form of greatness? Now the beer in them, but here's the explanation. Hachedis miloshin chidish is mevayer di matara close when kol Torah mitzvah kinal. As we said earlier, the fact hachedish azalochem is introducing the mission statement of Torah mitzvahs. And we bowed as the chidish von Torah mitzvahs and say nekudas klalius. And since this novelty, this newness that Torah mitzvahs is accomplishing is in 2 different areas. Which one is going to be connected to Moshe and the other will be connected to Aaron, as we will explain shortly, is in their parsha, that this parsha highlights the connection to both. Und der Pfarrer sagt der Medrash of der Parsha Davke Teiv Mashnayim in Echad. So Achidus is Elochem, which is the Chiddush of creation. Who is it said to? Moshe and Aaron. Both Moshe and Aaron are going to help us accomplish this Chiddush of Didi B'Tachtainim. And therefore, in this parsha, you see very clearly Teiv Mashnayim in Echad, that you need both in the parsha. And that's why the Medrash chooses this pasuk to make its point, because in this pasuk you see clearly the participation and the toivim of the fact that you have Shnayim, the fact that you have both Moshe and Aaron. So now we have to explain what taka is this 2-part chiddush and what role do Moshe and Aaron play in this, and then we'll get back to the Eidei Re'iyah and the Cheshbon by Kiddush HaChiddush. Moshe and Gerat Kama Pa'alim in the Pirush Lashon Dira Leizbarach B'Tachtainim. It's been discussed in previous places in Chassidus, and the Cherem Moshe and Gerat means in previous places in the Kutasichas. In Dira Leizbarach B'Tachtainim, das ist Keil Tzvei Nekudas Koliyos, it includes 2 general ideas. Aleph mitzad Tachtainim. On the one hand, from the perspective of the below, as men darv zei machen royal zezon zaina Dira Leizbarach, that the creations down below have to be fit, have to be prepared, that they should become a dwelling place for Hashem. There has to be a sense of bittul, something that they have to be willing and accepting of this godly light. Beis mitzad l'mayla, and there's also a perspective from above. The idea of Dira Leizbarach, a dwelling place for Hashem, means that the essence of Hashem comes in a revealed way into this world. As explained in numerous places in Chassidus, the idea of Dira, a dwelling place. A dwelling place is where the person dwells with his entire being. When he goes out of his Dira, he dresses up, he presents himself as he wants to be seen by others, or by the world. In his Dira, in his dwelling place, is where he is in his essence. The person as he is, not the facade that he's presenting. So the fact that it says Dira Leizbarach means that we want the Eibishter to bring with his entire essence into this world, which is a massive chiddush. Both of these things are unique. Warum kehren die Tachtonim werden neu zu sein, Adidele is Barach, muss sein der Bittel Yesh Layin? Number one, in order for the Tachtonim, in order for the creations to be a dwelling, to be ready to receive Hashem, there has to be Bittel, which of course is contrary to their natural state, which is that they are a Yesh. So the Bittel, that is a Chiddush. Also the idea that you can draw Atzmus into this world, into this low world, is also unique, also novel. Because the creation, as we see it, was created from the words of Hashem, which the words of Hashem are only an external ray, a ray of the godly light. So really, there's no room for Atzmus. The most that can be revealed in this world is the Ha'ara, is the Dvar Hashem. Und darf gedruckt der Avede von Bitla Yes Laien wird aufgetan nach Chiddush. Dem Shachas Asfas Lamata. But when the Yidden do the Aveda and they inject the Mata, the Tachtonim, with a Bitl, they're able to do something that is entirely novel, to bring the essence of Hashem into this world, despite the fact that this world was only built to contain the ha'ara of godliness, the ray of godliness, and yet it's possible to bring the essence of godliness into this world. So it's a two-part chiddush. The fact that the creations can be brought into a state of bittul, and the fact that atzmus can be brought into a space that was created by a ha'ara. Und das ist der Tam, for was der Medrash sagt auf der Parsha Daf Ketevim Mishnayim and Echad. Now let's go back to the fact that we said that Moshe and Aaron are part of this, and that's why the Medrash says Toiv Mashnayim and Echad on this Parsha, that you need to have the two of them. Well, in their Parsha was Gitzecharus Atachas and Gans Teiro Mitzvahs, because this Parsha, which as we said earlier, is giving us the purpose of the entire Teiro Mitzvahs, Zayin Mudgus Beidin Nekudas, both of these elements are highlighted. Sai Moshe Sheshvina de Malka. You have on the one hand Moshe, who is the escort of the king Hashem, which helps the drawing down of godliness into this world. He escorts Hashem, so to speak, into this world from above, which means that he gives the kayach, the possibility that we can draw down atzmas into this world. Say Aaron, you also need Aaron, who is the escort of the matron of the queen, whose job is to elevate the below. Aaron gives us the strength to be able to elevate the creations so that they should be able to receive Atzmos, the revelation of Atzmos. So far, what we understand is that the mission statement of Teiro Mitzvahs is Dira B'Tachtenim. Dira B'Tachtenim is a Chiddush, HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. And it's a Chiddush because Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a Chiddush because you need a bittul on the part of the creations. You need the revelation. It's also a Chiddush on the part of Lamaila, that Atzmos can come down into this world. And how does it get done? Obviously through the Yidden. But who is their support system? Moshe and Aaron. Moshe helps the Chiddush Milamaila happen, and Aaron helps the Chiddush Milamata happen. In Siv Ches, the first part of Siv Ches, the Rebbe is going to say that similarly, it's this impact of Achedes Zolachem is not just on the world, it's also on the Yidden that are accomplishing it. Just like this mitzvah is telling us the purpose, the mission statement of Teiro Mitzvahs as it affects the world, it also expresses the impact of Teiro Mitzvahs on the Yidden. Yidden are compared to the moon, because the moon is the smaller luminary, and the Yidden are called Katan, the Yidden are the minority. So the fact that the moon waxes, it gets bigger constantly, this represents the fact that also Yidden, when they serve Hashem through Teiro Mitzvahs, they also are made, they go from being small to becoming great. Now, the Aliyah von Yidden tells sich in zwei Sugim. And this ascent of the Jewish people through Teiro Mitzvahs can also be divided into two categories. On the one hand, you have the Aveda, the person who works with his inner faculties. He uses his mind and he uses his heart to serve Hashem. which generally speaking, in general category, this is Aveda that is within the realm of intellect. The Meile von der Aveda is in Apnimius. The advantage of this form is that it actually permeates the person. If a person can understand it, if a person could feel it, it becomes more meaningful in a sense because he understands what's happening. His intellect, his emotions are serving Hashem. It's much more personal when he's using his keches pnimiyim. Base, but it is also another form of aliyah. The Aveda mitzad keches makifim shel neshama. The Aveda that comes from the more external, the more encompassing elements of the neshama, or the essence of the neshama, which doesn't permeate the person. But where do you see the makif of the neshama, or the etzem neshama? You see that in the subjugation to the Eibishter's Ratzin that supersedes knowledge, that supersedes intellect. In other words, for example, emunah, the relationship on an emunah level. On the one hand, the advantage of it is that even if you don't understand, you still have a relationship. On the other hand, it doesn't actually permeate the person. Like we know the famous thing that that a person could be stealing and davening to Hashem at the same time, because emunah doesn't change the person. So the advantage is that there's a relationship. The disadvantage, or to say the advantage of keches pnimiyim, is that it actually changes the person. So just like we said that there's two elements to Dira B'Tachtenim as it affects the world, as it comes Milamata, as it comes Milamayla, so too in the ascent that a Yid experiences through serving Hashem, there's also two very similar elements. And that is, there is what serving Hashem from within himself, Milamata Lamayla in a sense, because it's coming from within himself, from his Seichel Amidis. And then there's another way of serving Hashem that's in a certain sense, Milamayla Lamata, it is rising above Seichel Amidis and serving Hashem on a bittul level. Now let's go back to Eidei and the Chesbin. Das ist der echte Tama Pnimi, was der Chesbin nicht wird durchbetet dann zusammen. Sei Eidei und sei Chesbin, and this is the reason why we need to have both when establishing the new month. Both the witnesses who have seen the new moon, as well as the calculations by Bezdin, because you want to have der Chibur von Beide Meile zusammen, because the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh is when it fuses together both of these two advantages. Es ist dort der Ingen von der Iya, was Sache von Avana Vasagar Iya in Chassidus is often used as when you see something, it doesn't have to make sense. People can argue with you that doesn't make sense. If you saw it, you saw it. Amunah is often compared and put in the same category as the Iya, because it transcends intellect. Al Yidei Eidus was given a rein a takers of Tedem Mitzad. Who sees it? The witnesses. The witnesses were given this strength that Torah gives that is beyond understanding. They're bittul smal matamadas. This represents the keches makifim, the serving Hashem, the bittul to Hashem that transcends logic, that transcends understanding. Unas is da. Then there's the element of the chesbon, the calculations, which represents the idea of serving Hashem logically, understanding it, feeling it. Tamvadas. And now, when you have the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, which is a fundamental mitzvah, it's the mission statement of the Torah mitzvahs. The whole reason why the Eibishter gave Torah mitzvahs to make a Dira B'Tachtenim. And the Dira B'Tachtenim affects L'mayla and L'mata. The Dira B'Tachtenim affects the Yid, L'mayla B'Tam Vadas and Alpitam Vadas. So now, when you have it all together, you have this fusion. Now, when you have both of them, what you're taking is this highest connection to Hashem. That's a bittul that supersedes logic and understanding, and you bring it down into chesbon. You bring it down into something that you could make sense of it, that you could understand it, and this fusion is what makes it possible to have the chiddush of Dira B'Tachtenim both on the world and on the person.